I was an actress, and I had just finished a movie, and I had some money for a vacation, and I decided to come to Mexico. And friends of mine had told me about this wonderful art colony, and I came down here to take some art classes because I studied art in École des Beaux-Arts in Montreal. So I went to Mexico City first, and then came here and was coming down the Caracol, and my heart was pounding because it was so beautiful and wonderful. And the bus in those days took you right to the heart of town. I got out of the bus, and that was it. I fell in love with the town. That was it. Love.
You were on your own?
I was on my own. I was alone, and I had been to one other Latin American country. I'd spent a summer teaching English in Peru. I didn't speak Spanish, but I wasn't unfamiliar with the sounds of it, and had loved my experience, my Latin American spirit, so it seemed like a perfect holiday for me. That was the idea, a month's holiday.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. You never left?
No, I never left. I did have to go home and get rid of my stuff, and I had 2 summers I had summer jobs in Montreal, sold all my university books, gave away everything, but basically that was it. I just thought, this is a wonderful place, and I'm going to give it 5 years. I thought, if I could live here 5 years, do my artwork, because I always did the artwork as well as struggle to be an actress. God, what couldn't I produce in 5 years? I could just really do a lot of work, and of course, the years went by, and it was, eventually I married and had children, and made my life here.
What were your first impressions, not only of the place, but what other foreigners were here, and what were your some of your first experiences with them?
There were very few foreigners, a very small group, mostly older people, retired. These were not your typical retirees. Every single one of them had been creative, and were still creating. They'd been writers, or in advertising even, but they were still vibrant and alive. They may have been in the theater. And it was a very small group who knew each other, and we all played together. We had a lot of fun. Everybody was very busy doing things, and when we didn't do something, we were together. When we weren't doing our own projects, we were partying, which we did a lot of.
Was it in town? Were there places that still exist where you were partying?
Well, there was the famous Cucaracha bar where Banamex is today, where the machines are, where the ATM machines. There was a long bar, and you never knew when you went in there what would go on. I mean, there could be a gunfight, there could be raucous singing. It was just so much fun. It was like being in a movie. And on Aldama, there was a very nice place called the Hosteria del Parque, and that played romantic trio music. So these places no longer exist under their former, guise, but they're there, and when I walk by them, sometimes I think of them. A lot of the homes are still here, but they belong to different people, of course. But everything was downtown. Everybody lived downtown and walked around downtown.
So, how did the place change? What happened?
Well, for a long time it didn't change. I'd say the first 10 years were the same, day after day. I mean, glorious weather, wonderful skies, light, warmth, the good life, my concept of the good life. Lots of time to do work, didn't take much money to live, and there was plenty of work. If I wanted to work, I could work. Slowly but surely, though, that after that first 10 years, different kind of people started coming. We'd always had people whose families had sent them here, maybe to get rid of them, and we'd had some people hiding out. But now sometimes we'd have people who had difficulties in their country and would come here. But basically, people start to see this as a place to make money. And consequently, they weren't nearly as interested in getting to know the Mexican people, learning the language, understanding as much as one can another culture. They start to look at it with business people's eyes, you know, and that was the big difference. None of us did anything about our living here. We just lived here. Nobody knew or cared about where you came from or what you had. It was, what were you doing? Were you an interesting person, and what were you creating? And that was our life.
When do you think it started to change?
Well, I personally had an experience I was thinking back about 12 or 13 years ago. Somebody came to town, and one of the things I did was take care of just a few homes downtown, and this person approached me about it and said, well, why don't we go into business together? And I said, okay, maybe that would work. And her husband, I remember saying, well, you know, you're not bringing much to the table, though, you know. I said, well, I have been here 20 years, and I speak the language, and you don't. And his concept was, if you didn't bring money to the table, then you didn't have any value. And that was, for me, that was when it all started, when we had never experienced that here. It was like this wonderful community where things like that had no import. But from then on, that's the kind of people that started to come here. It became more a question of what you had and your possessions. And so that was...
Roughly when was that?
That was about 12 years ago, 13 years ago. It started very slowly. It's accelerated immensely in the last 5 years, I would say. Very big change.
We were speaking to Warren this morning. He was talking about really two communities of, and other people have referred to this as well, really two communities of foreigners here. One is the people who see some material advantage here and are not that concerned with the language of the culture. They may have some. And the others, more like yourself, who came for the quality of life. You have any further comment about that? Do you perceive that?
I agree with that totally. It results in the old-timers, like we consider ourselves old-timers, huddling together, you know, not understanding. You have to remember that I came here before computers were big, before people made enormous fortunes, so that whole thing just went by us. So really hard to understand each other. It's very hard for the two separate groups. They can't possibly understand somebody, for example, who would choose a life with little financial remuneration, but a quality of life that has been so enriching. And equally, I can't understand for myself working and slaving away 8, 10, 12 hours a day. I've never worked 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Worked a lot, but hasn't been only work, and that's the main lesson here is, yes, you have to work, and hopefully you enjoy your work, but that's not all there is. So that's I would say the big, yes, definitely, big difference in the way of living life.
And how did you first find out about San Miguel?
My friends in Montreal, who were writers and sculptors and painters, knew about San Miguel as an artist colony. And when I said I was going to Mexico for a vacation, they said, you must go to San Miguel. So I took their advice, and it worked for me. It was, without me knowing it, it was what I was looking for.
And what was it in your life that prompted you or allowed you to make a fairly impulsive decision like that, to say, well, I'm going to live outside the borders of my home country?
Well, I think you have to go back to where I was born in Europe myself. I was a year old when my family immigrated to Canada. I was a refugee from the war, and even though Canada welcomed us and was wonderful to us and gave me a wonderful education, I'm a Canadian citizen to this day, I never really felt Canadian particularly. And as soon as I could, when I was 18, when I finished high school, I worked for a year, and then I got on a boat and went to Europe by myself. I guess I just had to see something else. So I hitchhiked around Europe for about 6 months. So the concept of not being in Canada wasn't so strange to me. But I didn't come here with the idea of leaving Canada, but it touched my heart so deeply. I just said, I'm just going to do this. This is what I'm going to do, stay here.
Mm. What do you think, just shifting gears a little bit, what do you think the impact of the development here has had on the Mexicans, both culturally and economically?
My perception is that economically, San Miguel's an island of prosperity in the sense that there is plenty of work. They have to import construction workers. There are a lot of crews here that people bring in. From Toluca, from Pozos. They come, they work the whole week, they go home on the weekends, or they do shift work, because there is so much demand for construction workers. So there is work. This is not a poor town compared to other towns in Mexico. However, there's no question that it has made for two different worlds. Where before we would meet, I personally married Mexican and was married to him for 15 years, and my children were born here and raised here. And this was not uncommon. I think it would be most unusual nowadays, because there's no question the two cultures don't mix or blend the way that they used to. Which is sad, because we both have so much to learn from each other. I know I was transformed by living here. I became a different person. I became the person I truly am. That is how I saw. I would watch people come here and they'd be all tight and closed down, and because Mexicans are naturally generous and hospitable and warm and loving, they have bad qualities too, we all do, but I would just see people slowly relaxing, unfolding, and letting their true natures come forward. They become more open and generous like their hosts in this country. I don't see that as a possibility anymore, because the two hardly ever meet anymore in any sense.
Do you think there's resentment?
There has to be. One other point, there have always been very wealthy people in San Miguel. The Rockefellers had a home here. There are people, owners of the King, big money. However, most of the time the homes were pretty discreet. They fit in with the town. They were probably better than most Mexican homes, but they were nothing like the mansions, these huge empty mansions that people are putting up now. So there wasn't seething resentment before, but there has to be now when they see such a disparity. The difference the gap has widened so much. I'm sure there is. But the impatience, in Mexico, it doesn't matter. Things will get done when they get done, and that has not changed, luckily.
What do you miss about North American culture?
Well, I can't think of a thing. I really can't. I don't think I belong there at all. The last time I went was 7 or 8 years ago. I went to Canada 7 years ago. And I felt like a person from Mars, I don't get it. I would see the people get on their commuter train, and my brother lives in the suburbs. I visited my brother outside of Toronto. And they had these sour, tired looks on their faces, and I just didn't get it. I didn't understand it, and I don't know why people live like that, but I have, in the intervening years, I've been up in the United States as a tourist, and I didn't even know how to check out groceries in the grocery store, because they changed everything. You have to put the card in. So these people got very angry at me behind, because I didn't know how to do these things. But I don't even mind. I don't mind. It doesn't matter that I'm out of step. I mean, who cares? I'm just a visitor up there, so.
Do you think recent political events have changed the view of North Americans down here on a kind of blanket level?
Well, I think the ones you mean the ones who are already here, or the ones who are coming?
Well, yes, the ones who are already here.
The ones who are already here are saying, "Oh boy, did we make the right decision." And the ones that are coming, I think of them as refugees, rich refugees. A lot of them have told me in some of the work that I do. I've talked to them, and they said it's untenable for them. They can't live up there anymore, and they have to live somewhere else. And if they have children, they don't want to raise their children up there. and
For political reasons.
for political reasons. Absolutely.
It's interesting because we haven't had too much. I mean, it's in the air, but nobody has said it
Oh,
that
really?
specifically
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, and political reasons, and also the values. If they're raising their children, they say, it's really important to me that my children at least experience a life where the values seem to be in place. You know, families have importance. Money is not everything. I've run into a number of those. As I say again, I see that because working as an interpreter in lawyer's office, they're buying land to build houses, and they come here with their children, and that's their reason. Because I ask them, I said, well, what are you doing? And then that's probably why you haven't heard it. And I happen to run into people like that.
All right, well, let's do that. Why don't you describe a day in your life back when it was a relatively simpler and more primitive place, I guess.
Well, first of all, I have to preface by saying I was able, as everyone was in those days, to shape my life according to my needs and wants. There was no societal pressures, there were no rules and regulations except what the government, this is Mexico, you have to know the rules and live by them. But beyond that, I shaped my days to my necessities and my desires. So that usually meant getting up and taking a morning walk, which I continue to do. I've walked every day, every week, 5 days a week. It used to be 6, our families complained. I've walked with the same woman up into the hills for over 20 years, maybe 23 or 4 years. So there's a 45-minute walk every morning, which keeps us limber and helps us mentally. Then I would usually go and, back in the old days, I'd go to my etching class, which I started out as a student. I became the etching teacher at I called it Escuela de Bellas Artes. So I only did that 3 days a week. I personally don't like to do the same thing. I always like to be doing 2 or 3. I always have 2 or 3 different kinds of jobs. That works for me. So I would work for 3 hours in the morning, and then I would go home and have lunch and my siesta, of course, And when I had small children, my afternoons I dedicated to my children. We'd go to the jardín, which was safe, and the children would play, and or we'd go visit someone, and it would be this very fulfilling life. I was always able to afford help. I had full-time help with my children, so I could enjoy the children. That was as far as children are concerned. As far as my own work, I always had a studio. I was always able to go to my studio in my free time and do my artwork. And then people would approach me with projects or jobs, and that's how besides the teaching was almost a gift. I really did it because I loved to teach. I worked for the Mexican government. The pay was very, very little, but over the course of the years, I adapted to whatever people needed. So I always had interesting jobs to do, and then we would socialize with like people, and people would discuss their work or their shows, and there was a lot of very pleasant, low-key socializing. But that was a typical day.
How is it different, the relationships you have with Mexicans, the relationships you have with fellow North Americans?
Many years ago, it was very different because it would be very hard to have a close relationship with a Mexican woman because they were not in the habit of discussing personal things with, North American women. First of all, they come from large families, so their best friends are their siblings or their cousins. They didn't have any need to look outside the family for friendships. So, however, I did notice a change come over Mexican women as the years went by, decades. I've lived here decades, and they before you'd say, well, how are things, and they were always perfect, right? And then slowly but surely, thinking of one woman who's eventually became a therapist, in fact, but she's opened up and started to say, well, I'm having problems with my husband or my family. These were not things that they would share before, and so there has been a big change. And personally, that is the kind of relationship I've since enjoyed with both Mexican and American, or North American women or European women who've lived here. There was a very definite difference before, but women have come a long way in this country. They have a long way to go, but they've come a long way.
Any specific examples of kind of discoveries, this must go way back with you, discoveries of mistakes you've made, or discoveries of how you need to be with Mexicans as opposed to your own country people?
I was young when I married, and I didn't give the idea of two separate cultures any importance. I was young and thought, I spoke 3 languages when I came here, and I slowly learned Spanish, so that was my 4th language, and I thought, I can do this. I can do this. I love my husband. I love this place. I'll just do this. However, I have come to understand, for me, that there is really no way to penetrate another culture. I can promise you that I speak very good Spanish. I understand as far as I can understand, but there is no way that my husband, ex-husband, could have ever understood the fact that my mother was a survivor of Auschwitz. I mean, nor could I understand 8 of his siblings sharing 1 egg. That's what they had to eat. They were so poor. You use a lot of fat, and then you boil up the, you fry the egg, and it gets all puffy, and so those were worlds apart. I mean, there was no way, and the particular facts of our lives, but also in a more general way, I just could, there was a point beyond which I could not penetrate another culture. And it wouldn't matter what the culture was. I ran into the wall of limitations. That was my experience, and I make my living today translating from Spanish into English. So it's not that I'm not familiar or even willing, but I truly don't think it's possible.
Is your ex-husband a native of San Miguel?
Yes, he is.
Does he still live here?
Yes, he does. And we're friendly.
Let's talk about family. How many children do you have?
I have 3 children. They're bilingual and bicultural.
And do they live here?
Yes, they do. They live here. The oldest son has lived in other countries. He's lived in Canada and the United States, and he spent some time in Europe. But he's back here, and this is where he's most comfortable. And the younger ones have left on vacation, but they've never lived anywhere else.
And what do they do?
My oldest son is a painter, an artist, and I had a etching studio. He runs the etching studio and rents out time for other artists. And my daughter is a landlady. She owns a building that she rents out and takes care of, and she has a part-time job. She doesn't want to work full-time. She feels that life is not to just be working, and she wants to find her way. So, and my youngest son is still studying. But they're all here, and they like living here. They like the beauty.
What advice would you have to newcomers to take steps to adapt and acculturate themselves on a basic level?
It's vital to learn the language. And not just so that one can communicate and get what one needs. It's important as the only way to enter into a culture is to speak the language. And how is that important? It's important because that's how you find out more about yourself. And self-knowledge makes for a richer life. You find out about yourself because when you understand and you put yourself in a different circumstance than the one you were raised in, you see how you react and you meet the challenges. So without the language, this is closed to you. Any country is closed to you without the language.
What do you think the key is to learn? I mean, I ask this on a personal level. What do you think the key is to mastering the language? How did you?
Well, I'm not good at learning through books. I'm the kind of person who has to hear it. And my advice to someone who isn't good at book study is to just go right ahead. Blunder, make mistakes, but just keep pushing forward. I don't think it's that important that you get everything correct. It's much more important to not worry about being wrong or silly or stupid and just say what you want to say the best you can, and it'll be much appreciated and you'll lose your fear. There have always been artists working here. A lot of them do their work and sell it elsewhere. They don't show it in town or sell it in town. That was not unusual before. Nowadays, definitely a lot of people work geared to a certain market, you know, and I'm not nearly as involved. I don't teach anymore, so I'm not. I used to be much more involved and have shows and do all of that, but none of that interests me much anymore. So I would just say generally that I have one comment to make about that. As somebody who's been, I don't know, dental hygienist all their life, decides now's the time they're going to pick up a paintbrush and call themselves an artist after taking 3 art classes and ask a lot of money for wretched looking things, that I find offensive as someone who has worked many years and taught many years. It's like any other job. You have to put in your time. Writing a book, making a movie, painting a painting, it takes years and years of work. And so we get a lot of that. The people who've come to fulfill their dreams now, they didn't want to pay the price. So they wanted to have their whole life real comfortable, and now they're going to be artists, and they call themselves artists. So it got me going on a sore point there.
Su matrimonio.
Uh-huh. I know, I was thinking of you, but that's different. You live up there.
¿Qué dificultades
Right.
encontró
Sí.
en cuanto a estar casada con un mexicano?
Sí.
¿Y fue eso alguna parte o
Yo diré que fue un gran parte las diferencias
de la
culturales.
diferencia?
Sus expectaciones y las mías eran totalmente distintos, ¿no? Él esperaba que yo iba a ser una señora que quedaba en casa, nunca salía sin avisarle todo, o sea, bajo su dedo, ¿no? Y yo al contrario, he sido una mujer, he viajado, estudiado, de repente me tratan como pues, casi un sirviente, ¿no? Así me sentí yo. Entonces, fue siempre el gran problema, que él esperaba una cosa y yo otra, y nunca hablamos de eso antes. No se nos ocurrió, ¿no? Entonces, yo sigo pensando que es un maravilloso papá, un muy buen hombre. Simplemente no pensamos en las dificultades culturales que pueden surgir en esa situación. Y eso fue una de las mayores causas del divorcio. Of course, this is a male-dominated society in the extreme, but as the women are getting educated, they're making more. We're way behind. It's way behind North America, but if there's violence against them, they're slowly coming forward and speaking. They're making some of their demands met, but it's a long, hard road to go still.
Are there any organizations here for violence
Yes.
Against women?
Yes.
And if so, do you feel that that is part in a good side of expatriates' influence in the town?
Casa, which was started by a North American woman married to a Mexican, part of a very big, important San Miguel family, one of their aims is they work with women in violence, and it has made a lot of difference in a lot of women's life, and that has been a positive thing of the influx of North American women. We're still talking very small numbers, but it's a beginning, and there is a real need for it.